The Crusades and the relationship between church and state. The Crusades, 1095 to 1291, were not only military and religious campaigns, but also a reflection of the complex and evolving relationship between the church and secular authorities in medieval Europe. These campaigns highlighted the tension, cooperation, and interplay between spiritual and temporal powers. Here's an in-depth analysis of this dynamic. Church's role in initiating the Crusades. The Pope as spiritual leader. The Crusades were launched at the initiative of the Church, with Pope Urban II's call at the Council of Clermont in 1095 being a defining moment. The Pope positioned himself as the supreme authority over Christendom, encouraging knights and monarchs to take up the cross as a divine mission. Spiritual incentives. The Church offered spiritual rewards, such as indulgences, forgiveness of sins, and promises of eternal salvation, to participants. This was a clear assertion of the Church's power to grant spiritual benefits, often bypassing local clergy or secular rulers. Unifying Christendom. The Crusades were also a means to consolidate the Church's authority by uniting fragmented European states under a common religious cause. The state's role in the Crusades. Secular leaders' participation. Kings, princes, and nobles played critical roles in organizing, funding, and leading Crusader armies. For many rulers, participation was motivated by a mix of piety, political ambition, and the promise of territorial gains in the Holy Land. Economic and political benefits. Secular leaders sought to expand their influence and wealth through the conquest of new territories. The Crusades provided an opportunity to redirect the energies of restless knights and warring factions toward an external enemy. Tensions over control. While the Church initiated the Crusades, secular leaders often sought to assert their autonomy in military and political matters. Disputes frequently arose over the leadership and distribution of territories in the Crusader states. Key moments reflecting church-state dynamics. The First Crusade, 1096 to 1099, a relatively successful campaign in which the Church's authority was dominant. The Pope's call was widely supported, and secular leaders worked under the spiritual guidance of the clergy. The Second Crusade, 1147 to 1149, this crusade revealed tensions, as European monarchs like Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany struggled to coordinate with the Church and each other. Failures highlighted the challenges of balancing spiritual and temporal objectives. The Third Crusade, 1189 to 1192, led by powerful monarchs such as Richard the Lionheart, England, Philip II, France, and Frederick Barbarossa, Holy Roman Empire. Despite cooperation, personal rivalries between monarchs often undermined the Church's overarching goals. The Fourth Crusade, 1202 to 1204, this crusade showcased a dramatic shift, with secular and economic interests overshadowing religious motives. The sacking of Constantinople, a Christian city, by Crusaders strained the relationship between the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. Long-term impacts on church-state relations. Increased papal authority. The Crusades initially bolstered the power of the papacy, as the Pope was seen as the leader of Christendom. The ability to mobilize large-scale campaigns demonstrated the Church's influence over secular rulers. Secularization of power. Over time, secular leaders began to assert more control over crusading efforts, diminishing the direct influence of the Church. The rise of strong monarchies in France, England, and the Holy Roman Empire often conflicted with papal authority. Economic and administrative reforms. The need to fund crusades led to innovations such as increased taxation, the development of banking systems, and the establishment of military orders like the Templars, which operated semi-independently of both church and state. Weakened moral authority of the Church. Failures of later crusades and incidents like the Fourth Crusade undermined the Church's moral and spiritual authority. The misuse of crusading rhetoric for political purposes, such as campaigns against heretics or rival Christian factions, further disillusioned many Europeans. Broader implications. Shift in power dynamics. The Crusades contributed to the gradual decline of the feudal system, as kings consolidated power at the expense of local nobles and the Church. Military orders like the Knights Templar and Hospitallers became powerful entities, operating with relative independence. Cultural and religious legacy. The Crusades reinforced the idea of Europe as a unified Christian entity, albeit with growing internal divisions. The conflicts between church and state during the Crusades foreshadowed later struggles, such as the investiture controversy and the Protestant Reformation. Conclusion. The Crusades were a crucible for the evolving relationship between church and state in medieval Europe. While initially serving to unify Christendom under papal leadership, the campaigns ultimately revealed and deepened tensions between spiritual and temporal authorities. They marked a turning point in the balance of power, paving the way for the rise of strong centralized states and the eventual decline of the medieval church's dominance in European politics. The Crusades and the relationship between church and state. Introduction. The Crusades, spanning from 1095 to 1291, were pivotal in shaping the medieval world. They were not merely military campaigns to reclaim the Holy Land but also emblematic of the dynamic and often contentious relationship between church and state in medieval Europe. These campaigns, sanctioned by the Roman Catholic Church, involved monarchs, knights, and ordinary citizens, intertwining spiritual and secular objectives. This essay explores the multifaceted relationship between the church and secular rulers during the Crusades, tracing its evolution from cooperation to conflict. It examines the political, religious, and societal impacts of the Crusades on both institutions and evaluates their legacy in shaping Western Christendom. 1. Background: the Church and State in the Medieval World. 1.1 The medieval power structure. The medieval period saw a dual hierarchy of authority: the spiritual leadership of the Church, headed by the Pope, and the temporal authority of kings and emperors. These two pillars of power often coexisted uneasily. The Church's spiritual authority. The Church claimed supreme moral authority, rooted in its interpretation of divine will. Its control over sacraments and the promise of salvation gave it immense power over all classes of society. Secular authority. Monarchs wielded military and administrative power, often deriving legitimacy through the Church. Many rulers sought to balance allegiance to the Pope with their own ambitions for autonomy. 1.2 The rise of papal power. By the 11th century, the Church had begun consolidating its power. The Gregorian reforms, initiated by Pope Gregory VII, emphasized the primacy of the papacy over secular rulers. The investiture controversy, 1076 to 1122, a major conflict between Pope Gregory VII and Emperor Henry IV, set the stage for the Church's dominance in Europe. By the time of the First Crusade, the papacy was well positioned to lead a pan-European effort. 1.3 The context of the Crusades. The Byzantine Empire's request for military aid against Seljuk Turks presented Pope Urban II with an opportunity to assert papal leadership. The Council of Clermont in 1095 marked a turning point, as Urban II called for a holy war, framing the Crusades as a divine mission. 2. The Church's role in the Crusades. 2.1 Spiritual motivation. The Church framed the Crusades as a means of salvation, offering indulgences, remission of sins, to participants. This spiritual incentive underscored the Church's power to dictate moral and religious obligations. 2.2 Papal leadership. Pope Urban II. His call to arms at Clermont demonstrated the Church's ability to mobilize Europe under a unified religious cause. Subsequent popes. Leaders like Innocent III, organizer of the Fourth Crusade, expanded the Church's role, though sometimes with controversial outcomes, such as the sacking of Constantinople. 2.3 Crusading as a unifying force. The Crusades offered the Church a way to consolidate its influence over fragmented European states, redirect internal conflicts, e.g., feudal wars, toward an external enemy. 3. The role of secular leaders in the Crusades. 3.1 Monarchs as crusaders. Secular rulers played critical roles in organizing and leading crusades. Prominent examples include Richard the Lionheart, England, a key figure in the Third Crusade, known for his military prowess and rivalry with Saladin. Frederick Barbarossa, Holy Roman Empire. His participation underscored the importance of the Holy Roman Empire in crusader efforts. 3.2 Political ambitions. While many rulers joined the Crusades for religious reasons, political and economic motivations were equally significant. Conquering territories in the Holy Land offered strategic advantages, access to lucrative trade routes. 3.3 Tensions with the Church. Monarchs often resisted papal control over crusader campaigns. Disputes over leadership and the distribution of conquered territories highlighted the competing interests of church and state. 4. Key moments in church-state dynamics during the Crusades. 4.1 The First Crusade, 1096 to 1099. The First Crusade marked a high point of church leadership, as papal authority was largely unchallenged. Secular leaders cooperated under the spiritual direction of the Pope, resulting in the capture of Jerusalem. 4.2 The Second Crusade, 1147 to 1149. Tensions arose between secular monarchs like Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany and the Church, as the campaign ended in failure. 4.3 The Third Crusade, 1189 to 1192. This crusade demonstrated the growing dominance of secular rulers. Rivalries between monarchs such as Richard the Lionheart and Philip II of France often undermined unified efforts. 4.4 The Fourth Crusade, 1202 to 1204. The sacking of Constantinople by Crusaders, a Christian city, revealed the increasing secularization of the Crusades. Pope Innocent III's loss of control over the campaign marked a significant shift in church-state relations. 5. The impact of the Crusades on church-state relations. 5.1 Short-term impacts. Strengthened papal authority. The early Crusades reinforced the Pope's role as the spiritual leader of Christendom. Increased secular ambitions. The involvement of monarchs in Crusades bolstered their political and military influence. 5.2 Long-term impacts. The decline of papal authority. Failures in later Crusades and the misuse of crusading rhetoric for political purposes weakened the Church's moral authority. The rise of nation-states.